Is there a solution to Lebanon's crisis? Protesters are demanding an overhaul of the political system. The Prime Minister blames rival groups in his government for blocking reforms and has given them 72 hours to find a way out. Are there hopes for meaningful political and economic change? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Nastasya Tay. Outraged, defiant and united behind a demand for political change, Lebanese people from all religious and political backgrounds are calling for the Prime Minister, President and other leaders to resign. They say they want a revolution, many criticising their own political leaders, something unprecedented in a country divided by sectarianism. 2 days and nights of the largest protests in years were sparked by tax reforms, including charging to use phone calls on the social media service WhatsApp. That plan was quickly scrapped, but there are other long-standing grievances. They include high unemployment, constant electricity shortages, poor infrastructure and corruption. The protests are a challenge to the unity government and Prime Minister Saad Hariri. He's blaming parties in his coalition for obstructing reforms required to unlock $11 billion in aid pledged by international donors.
I'm giving our partners in the government a very short deadline, 72 hours to give us a solution that can convince us and the people in the streets and our international partners.
Our correspondent Zaina has more from Beirut.
Day 3 of the protests, people still defiant despite a government crackdown. Security forces and the army on late Friday used heavy-handed tactics to disperse the crowd and forcibly open highways which were blocked by burning tires. People here continue to demand the resignation of the government. They chant Thawra, Thawra, revolution, revolution, but it's easier said than done because the response from the ruling alliance has been, we are clinging on to power. The Hezbollah movement, which really leads the ruling alliance, the message from the Secretary General was very clear. You cannot topple the ruling alliance. People here were very angry. They considered this as a challenge, as a veiled threat. Nasrallah saying that if we decide to protest, the balance of power will change. So basically dismissing the tens of thousands of people who have been out on the streets demanding for better economic conditions. Hezbollah's solution is that government officials will find another way, apart from taxing the poor, to raise much needed government revenues. But people here want a change in the system. But in the words of Hassan Nasrallah, even if there's a new government, it will be the same political forces that will make up this government. To a certain extent, there is a reality to that because the political elite, they've been ruling this country for decades. There's really no alternative. The civil society has tried to make some sort of a comeback, but they haven't been able to do that. So it seems officials are working behind the scenes to find some sort of a compromise. People here will not be appeased by that, definitely, but then we could probably expect security forces to use even more heavy-handed tactics in order to calm the street. So really difficult times, and it's unclear what is going to follow, but what is clear, the balance of power is in the hands of the ruling authority. Zaina Khudr for Inside Story.
Well, let's take a look at some of Lebanon's problems. Lebanon has the world's third highest debt level, and more than a third of under 35s are unemployed. The government is accused of failing to provide basic services, with domestic waste piling up in the streets and generators needed to overcome electricity blackouts. Lebanese were further infuriated when the government needed foreign help to battle the worst wildfires in decades because firefighting helicopters were grounded. Long-running political instability has shaken investor confidence and made it harder to revive the economy. That's led to shortages of dollars and threatened pensions. Another drain on the economy is looking after 1.5 million Syrian war refugees. Well, let's have a listen to what some of the protesters in the streets have been saying.
There's no future for us, no jobs at all, and this is not acceptable anymore. We have shut up for a long time, and now it's time to talk.
These people did not take to the streets to cause riots and chaos, but to express their pain and suffering caused by this political situation.
The regime must be toppled from the top of the pyramid. It's not useful if just one goes away. We're hungry and tired. We have no social security. We don't have anything.
I'm 60 years old. Every day I go to Beirut just so I can feed my family. These politicians pass in front of me and no one looks at me. We want to overthrow the government, the regime and the parliament.
Well, let's introduce our panel of guests who are all in Lebanon's capital, Beirut. So by Skype, we have Yahya, who's the director of the Carnegie Middle East Center, Rana Khouri, a political activist, and also by Skype, Sami Nada, an economist and also director of the Levant Institute for Strategic Affairs. Welcome to you all. Well, Rana, starting with you, these problems have been going on for some time now. What's been the tipping point? What's brought you all out onto the streets?
I think, first, hello and thank you for having me. I think there is a lot of bad performance, a lot of belittling of the people's minds throughout the years. And I think the people were ready to say we had enough. They were ready because they clearly had enough. More poverty, less freedoms, more oppression. It was too much. Now, a lot of people are linking it to the decision of, or the discussion within the government of the WhatsApp tax. I think this is just another tax that the people said we've had enough of. We're not going to pay the price. We're not responsible of the bad management of this economy. It's been going on for years. We gave this mandate 3 years as a chance. It just collapsed even more, and that's it. So it was, I don't think it was the main reason. I think the whole performance of the government, and then there was a lot of bad decisions, one after the other, a lot of bad behavior with the people. A lot of activists were put, throughout the year 2019, 60 activists and journalists were asked to come to security forces interrogation just because of a Facebook status. More taxes, no employment, very bad behavior towards the people. I think all of this had to come out one day.
Well, you mentioned bad economic management there, and I was taking a look at the numbers, and they're pretty extraordinary. Lebanon's public debt is now equal to more than 153% of GDP, the third highest level in the world. So dollar reserves depleted. The country is now staring down the barrel of a possible devaluation of the lira. Sami, how did we get here?
We did here because for the 8th year in a row, it started in 2011, we have this very delicate situation and dangerous situation of the twin deficit. I mean, on one side, you have the budget deficit, which reach very worrying levels, and the budget of the balance of payment. You have more dollars or foreign currency getting out of the country than getting in. This led to the situation where we are today. And plus, you have a growth which is barely did not increase 1%. So we are practically, and for the 8th year in a row, in a deep recession. And this is translated by a high level of unemployment. This is what takes the people to the street today. But the absence of reform was one major reason why this budget deficit kept growing and widening deficit of the balance of payment. Now, what's very important, and this is one major slogan in the street, they want the change of the regime. And when they say they want the change of the regime, they mean the change of the current, the prevailing operating system, which is sectarian based, what we call in Arabic nizam muhasasa, whereby the political forces in name of the sectarian group they are representing are emptying the treasure, what the resources of the country. And this is this sectarian regime is the other face of the corruption.
Well, I do want to ask a little more about the economic crisis, and then we're going to move on to some of the other political issues, because I understand that Hariri has been doing the rounds in Paris, Abu Dhabi, trying to ask for money to solve some of these problems. And both Western governments and Gulf countries seem to be not terribly wanting to bail Beirut out again. So, Maha, is this a case of government saying to Beirut, enough is enough?
Very much so. I think it's saying to the current ruling elite that either you get your act together, particularly I think the position of European governments. There was the SAD mechanism that was established a couple of years ago and around 11 billion were pledged to Lebanon through SAD. Some of them were grants, some of them were soft loans, long-term soft loans with favorable interest rates. None of this funding has been released because it's contingent on reform. Until now, that reform has not been forthcoming. So what the message that Beirut is getting is enough is enough. You need to get your act together. You need to undertake painful but necessary reforms in order for this funding to be released and in order for us to continue supporting the country. Now, for the international community, they're sort of also caught between a rock and a hard place because they would obviously much rather not have another failed state on their hands in this region. But at the same time, there's been so much support coming to Lebanon over the past few decades. And much of this continues to be mismanaged, both economically and politically.
Well, there's
so
been
yes,
rising
I think
discontent.
unless these reforms are undertaken, we're not going to see any funding coming this way.
There has been this rising discontent around all of these issues for some time now, though. But now we're hearing the word unprecedented in relation to these protests. So, Maha, staying with you, talk me through what's different this time around. Because I know we've seen kids coming out with families in the streets. We've heard people calling out their own sectarian leaders by name. So talk us through what's different that we're seeing now.
I think what's very different are a couple of things. One is the spread and the location of these protests. They're happening across national territory and not just in the main cities. They were very spontaneous, so it's not a political party that's been calling for people to take this to the streets. And perhaps most importantly is we're seeing criticism of the political leadership coming from the community that they're supposed to be in control of. So we're seeing protests against the rule of both Hezbollah and the Amal movement from within the Shia community, the same within the Christian community, within the Sunni community. What people going to the streets have been saying, this is not about religion, it's not about sect. Actually, we want to bring down this sectarian regime, the sectarian political regime. We're fed up in the way sectarianism has been used by the political elite to siphon off funds from the state. In a sense, what Sami described as nizam al-muhassasa, i.e. you get a piece and I get a piece in return. So I think these are the things that are very much unprecedented in that sense. They're also, let's not forget, they're an accumulation. I mean, this is coming at a certain tipping point for the country. There's been a lot of discussion of a potential economic collapse in the country. People are scared. They're worried that if the lira collapses, then this means their savings will be wiped out. The future they won't be able to provide for their children. The future of their own children will be in jeopardy. Not to mention that their own already precarious standards of living will plummet down. One small figure that was released a few weeks ago, that the public school system has seen an 18% increase in enrollment by Lebanese kids. This is an indication, because historically Lebanese families have preferred private school system. This is one small indication that they can no longer afford to send their children to private schools. And it tells you, it's also an indication of how their purchasing power and their spending power is deteriorating, basically.
Well, there are clearly a lot of issues. And Rana, I'm going to come to you now, because these protests that are dealing with some of these issues, well, all of these issues, are leaderless. It's a social movement, by my understanding so far. So how unified are the protesters, and how concrete are the demands of all these protesters? And I understand that this is about calling for an end to the entire political system, but is there a suggestion about what an alternative would be?
So I think what unites the protesters, and this is very important, is the genuinity of the suffering of all of Lebanon. And this is very important. What we are saying is there was a cohabitation of the different sectarian political leaders. The people have been very clement to try this new deal that brought President Aoun to the presidency, between Hezbollah, between Hariri, between Aoun and other parties as well. It's not working. The gap is getting bigger and bigger. They're only getting richer. They're only getting more oppressive towards the people, and the people are getting poorer. They are getting more oppressed, and this is not working. There is a solution, of course. There's an economic solution. I'm sure Sami Nader has a lot to say in this. But first thing we are saying, we are not paying as people for the taxes that the rich can pay, people with profit can pay, banks can pay, rentees, economy can pay. So we will not pay for this bad management. And now we are saying there is a need for the government of all this mandate government, because this government represents the whole political class, from the president to Hezbollah to Hariri and the rest. We want them to resign. We want a government that cares about the people to come and find a solution to this horrendous crisis we are in, and then we take it further from there. We're not saying this is very easy, but we are saying this is possible. And it's possible. There are a lot of good people in this country that care about this country, that can take it a step up, because where we are now is the rock bottom.
Right, Maha, coming to you, but I believe we have just lost Sami Nader, so we are going to continue this discussion with just you, Maha and Rana. Maha, picking up there on what Rana was saying, is this about changing the people in government or changing the whole political system itself? Because there aren't that many alternatives on the table, by my understanding.
I think changing the people in government won't do much. It's the same political elite that's been running the country for the last, since the end of the Civil War in 1989, 1990. It's pretty much the same political elite. So removing them and bringing other people who are affiliated with them will not do much, in all honesty. The call to have a technocratic government, i.e. government made of experts, also will not do much, because unless we have a very solid political backing for them, in a way that will allow them to undertake the kind of reforms, the painful reforms that are needed, structural reforms to the way the country is governed both politically and economically, then that won't work pretty much either. So the alternatives really is to change the system, but I don't think, to my mind, I think it's very difficult to change the system under the current circumstances. So what I would see is some sort of incremental steps towards that goal. And this is something I think that needs to be discussed, thought through a lot more clearly in terms of what these steps would look like. How would one go about overhauling a system that is at heart clientelistic, with a clear identity? In other words, the sectarian power sharing is deeply ingrained in within the clientelist networks that run the country and that are responsible for siphoning the country's financial resources. So I think that there is a fundamental challenge there, and the impasse we find ourselves in today is not one that is easily surmountable. The question to my mind is, what will the next steps be on the part of the government?
Hassan Nasrallah has made his first comments since these protests began. Let's take a listen.
It's wrong to say that the government has no other choice than imposing taxes. If we cooperate, give priority to the economic state, we'll be able to save our country. We don't want the government to resign. If it does, it will take 1 or 2 years to form a new one, and the economic crisis will worsen.
So he's clearly saying no resignations there, but he's also been calling for a plan in which the rich, poor, leaders and banks would sacrifice to end the crisis. What does he mean by that? And is that likely, Rana?
First, what does it mean? It will take 2 years to form a new government. Who's it? If they have good faith and they are saying we can't cohabitate, all of them said it, there are veto powers inside the government. We are not being able to serve the people the way we should. So who is this it who will take 1 or 2 years to form a government that cares about the people? What we are saying is you have to resign. Now the mandate needs to end right now. It's an era that didn't work. We want a new government, new people in power that will make us get out of this crisis. And yes, there is an economic way of getting back money, of taking money that is not from the people. We talked about progressive taxes. We spoke about taxes on profits of the banks. We spoke about the rentees economy and how there are a lot of apartments that are empty in this city alone, in Beirut. I'm sure in the rest of Lebanon as well. There are properties on the seashore that are illegal that could be taxed as well. All of this could happen. We can stop putting people in jail for their opinions. We can stop now. Yesterday, people were put in jail. Now there were people who were arrested right now because they were protesting. We can stop doing that. A new government, if there is a good faith from the people, because the people in power, and this is also something we have to understand, yes, they were elected in the parliamentary elections, but this doesn't mean that people are not angry. And this doesn't mean that people voted for many reasons. And this doesn't mean that today we have the right to say we've had enough. And this cohabitation of these sectarian leaders is not working. It didn't work. It created a war. It's not working. It created poverty. It's a bunch of corrupted mafia leading the country. So what Hezbollah is saying is a bit weird, taking into account that they are part of the same cohabitation of political leaders, of political elite. They are ministers, they are in the parliament, they are in other institutions in this government. So we can't, when they talk about not taking responsibility, they should be the first one as well taking this responsibility and say, it's not working, we have to get out.
Maha, one of the other things that Nasrallah said was that if Hezbollah then takes to the streets, the supporters of Hezbollah, that would change the balance of power on the streets. And there have already been reports of militiamen from other political factions trying to confront or intimidate protesters. So how real is the threat of a confrontation on the streets, as you see it?
I think we'll see confrontations on the streets. We're already seeing it in some parts of the south of Lebanon, for example. In Tyre, we've been getting a lot of reports this morning in Sur that some of the gunmen of Amal have been taking to the streets and intimidating protesters. However, this is not going, I mean, there is a small genie that's been let out of the bag. People are not intimidated anymore. They're not scared to say, we know you've been, stealing from us for decades now. We may see the same phenomenon in other parts of the country where the diehard supporters of the current political elites will stand in for their sectarian representatives. However, what Rana was saying, which is there is a need for new blood, new faces in government. There is a desperate need for a new approach to the political and economic governance of the country. We are at an impasse, but it doesn't mean that there is no way out, if you like. In addition to the things that Rana mentioned, there are lots of fundamental reforms that can be done within the current budget that would reduce the budget deficit in a substantial way. These things are not being done because the current political leadership is still using state funds, projects that are run by state institutions, as well as the institutions, as a way to siphon off funding for its own purposes. This is coming at a time also when there's a global financial or decline on the economic front. Regionally, the region is in considerable turmoil. The traditional sources of funding,
Maha,
the rentier
I'm sorry,
economy.
I'm going to interrupt you there because I have one last very quick question and we are running out of time. And I do want to ask Rana this. If in the next 72 hours or as this deadline passes, if they manage to find some kind of agreement and they unlock this $11 billion of magic money that could solve some problems, will the protests stop then, Rana? Very briefly, yes or no?
If this happens, that they have been fooling us for the past 3 years of this mandate, and they have getting people poorer and poorer and oppressing people whereby they can find solutions in 72 hours. And if this happens, then this is a big lie. And then this is what they have been doing for 3 years, is actually the most hypocritical government that ever existed. We've tried them for 3 years, for 30 years, as Maha said, after the civil war. our generation is not paying the price for what's being done before. We want a change, and we want it now. We have nothing more to lose, nothing.
And that's where we'll leave our discussion today. We'll continue watching all of this very closely. Thanks to all of our guests, Maya Yahya, Rana Khoury, and Sami Nadav, who was with us earlier. And thank you too for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, do go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Nastasya Tay, and the whole team here, bye for now.